What drives people to become part of the criminal world? Influence, money, or maybe just a simple desire to destroy everything in their path. My name is Knox, and today we're diving into the darkest and most shocking stories of the Hell's Angels. People who have turned their lives into a constant battle with the law. You'll find out what really lies behind the leather jackets and chrome motorcycles. And the stories I'm about to tell will turn your perception of the criminal world upside down. If anyone thinks that I will bow my head and beg for mercy, they are as wrong as the jury that convicted me. Yes, I will see you all in hell, remember that? These words were spoken by Joseph Lancha, a man whose character and actions made him a symbol of why the Hell's Angels are called that. Joseph Lancha, president of the Rhode Island chapter of the Hell's Angels, was known for his influence and charisma. His reputation was always on the edge. His name was associated with numerous criminal stories. But the events of June 2019 shook even those who were used to hearing rumors about his bold actions. The Hell's Angels clubhouse in Providence looked impenetrable. A massive building, iron gates, surveillance cameras. This was the place where club members gathered, made plans, and discussed strategies. But on that day, things got out of hand. Richard Stano, allegedly linked to a rival gang, drove his truck straight to the clubhouse gates. The tensions between the Hell's Angels and Stano had been going on for several months. And this standoff was turning into a series of provocations and threats. The club members were closely watching the truck, keeping an eye on its every move. Lancha stepped out of the clubhouse, gun in hand, and then a shot rang out. The bullet hit the truck, causing instant chaos. The police arrived within minutes. They surrounded the clubhouse and carried out a bold daytime raid. Joseph Lancha was arrested right on the spot. The surveillance cameras provided undeniable evidence. The video showed him calmly raising his weapon, aiming, and pulling the trigger. The investigation revealed that this wasn't just a reaction, but a calculated move. At the moment of the shot, kids were playing nearby, and the truck was dangerously close to the school. The trial became the event of the year. Prosecutors described Lancha as someone who doesn't recognize laws and rules. The defense, for its part, argued that he acted in self-defense. Despite the defense's loud claims, the video footage and witness testimonies left little doubt. The court sentenced Joseph Lancha to 5 years in prison for armed assault. Adam Liehol, a name that has become synonymous with brutality and a cynical willingness to do anything for his own gain. This Hell's Angels member from Massachusetts went down in history as a guy willing to take out any witnesses who got in his way. The case began with allegations against Hall in 2011. At that time, he was suspected of attacking someone with a baseball bat, allegedly over a stolen carburetor. However, the real blow for Hall was that his victim, David Glazer, decided to testify in court. For Hall, this meant the end. He knew that if Glazer testified, he was facing a long prison sentence. 2 years later, in September 2011, things took a dark turn. Glazer, along with his friends Edward Frampton and Robert Chadwell, went missing. Their bodies were later found, cut up, wrapped in plastic bags, and buried. The autopsy revealed that before their deaths, they were tortured and then shot. The investigation found that Hall was the mastermind behind the murders. He set up a meeting with Glazer under the pretense of reconciliation, but instead, he grabbed him and 2 of his friends. For Hall, they were just unwanted witnesses that needed to be taken out. The prosecution presented the testimonies of 2 of Hall's accomplices, who confirmed his role in the crime. They detailed how Hall personally tortured and killed the victims, and then oversaw the destruction of the evidence. Despite the lack of direct evidence, like DNA or fingerprints, their testimonies became key evidence. The defense tried to challenge the credibility of the witnesses, claiming they could be pinning the blame on Hall to lighten their own sentences. But that didn't help. The court found Hall guilty on all counts: murder of 3 people, kidnapping, and witness intimidation. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The families of the victims, while feeling some relief, were shocked by the brutality of the crime. This case became one of the most high-profile in the history of the Hells Angels. Next up is a case that shocked not just America, but the whole world. Jay Witt, a member of the Hells Angels, became the main suspect in a murder, and what a murder it was. It all started on July 14, 2013, when the body of William Furlong was found at the Hells Angels clubhouse in Nebraska. He was lying face up near the bar, showing no signs of life. Surveillance cameras captured Jay Witt entering the clubhouse with his girlfriend, Tammy Kegg, around 2 in the morning. Everything looked completely normal. But hours later, video footage showed the pair leaving the club with a suspicious plastic bag. Witt was carefully wiping down the doorknobs, clearly trying to destroy evidence. The investigation revealed that Witt and Kegg went to a gas station and then disappeared into Iowa. 2 weeks after the arrest warrant was issued, Jay Witt was taken into custody. The interrogations revealed a key detail. Kegg admitted that Witt woke her up saying, "You'll see a body when you come downstairs." Prosecutors charged Witt with second-degree murder and using a weapon during the commission of a felony. At the trial, detectives described how they discovered Furlong's body, and Kegg's testimony became one of the decisive pieces of evidence. She admitted that she helped Witt get rid of the evidence out of fear of him. The trial lasted several months. Despite the defense's arguments, the jury delivered a guilty verdict. Witt was sentenced to 30 years in prison. But his story didn't end there. Shortly after being incarcerated, he died under mysterious circumstances. If Jay Witt's brutality shocked the public, then the story of Kai Vavis stunned everyone, not just because of his crimes, but also because of his terrifying appearance. Vavis, also known as Roy Jinsky Jr., wasn't just an accomplice in murders. His looks, sharp teeth, implanted horns, and a split tongue became a symbol of horror and evil. Vavis, also known as Roy Jinsky Jr., wasn't just an accomplice in murders. His appearance, sharp teeth, implanted horns, and forked tongue became a symbol of horror and evil. Police discovered that Vavis, along with Hall and other accomplices, participated in the torture and murders of David Glasser, Edward Frampton, and Robert Chadwell. Their goal was clear: preventing Glasser from testifying in court at any cost. The investigation found that Vavis not only took part in the brutal acts, but also enjoyed it. In his apartment, they discovered human anatomy diagrams, knives, and a machete. Witnesses reported that he took pleasure in the torture. In his apartment, they found human anatomy diagrams, knives, and a machete. Witnesses said he took pleasure in the torture. At trial, the defense argued that Vavis was not at the crime scene. His lawyers pointed out the lack of physical evidence. However, the prosecution presented blood found in his car and numerous testimonies that pointed to his involvement. The court found him guilty and sentenced him to life imprisonment without the right to parole. When the verdict was announced, Vavis screamed in the courtroom, "I'll see you all in hell." His figure will remain one of the darkest in the history of the Hells Angels. "I'll see you all in hell." His figure will remain one of the darkest in the history of the Hells Angels. Stephen Sanders. In June 2013, Stephen Charles Sanders, the former president of the San Diego chapter of the Hells Angels, found himself at the center of a high-profile case. His name came up in connection with a series of kidnappings, assaults, and even attempted murders. This man, once wielding absolute power in his gang, has now become the focus of intense scrutiny from law enforcement. But how did the leader of a criminal organization end up in the defendant's seat? Sanders was powerful. His word was law. In 2007, he expelled Nick Neff. His decisions were not questioned, and his word was law for the gang members. In April 2007, he initiated the expulsion of one gang member, Nick Neff, putting him in a bad spot with the others. For For the Hells Angels, this meant a death sentence, but instead of being killed, Neff faced a humiliating punishment. His tattoos, which symbolized his affiliation with the gang, were destroyed. This served as a warning to others: betrayal is not forgiven. His tattoos, which symbolized his affiliation with the gang, were destroyed. This served as a warning to others: betrayal is not forgiven. But that's not where the story ends. Sanders, along with 2 other gang members, kidnapped Neff, forcing him to sign over the rights to his motorcycle and ransacking his home. This operation was carried out with frightening coldness and calculation. But what was especially shocking was that such actions had become routine for the gang. The fall of the leader. By 2010, Sanders' power started to waver. His name was increasingly linked to crimes that went beyond even the criminal code. One of his victims was a motorcycle shop employee, Preston James. What started as just another workday ended in a nightmare. Sanders and 2 of his henchmen brutally beat James, kidnapped him, stole his motorcycle, and then robbed his house. These actions further solidified Sanders' reputation as a man willing to do anything to maintain power. But despite all his brutality, Sanders couldn't escape the law. Law enforcement launched a large-scale investigation that led to his arrest. In court, prosecutors presented charges of kidnapping, attempted murder, robbery, and extortion. Sanders was also charged with the intent to eliminate witnesses, including law enforcement officers, to avoid punishment. The trial was full of dramatic moments. Sanders' lawyers have tried to portray him as a victim of the system, arguing he was targeted for prosecution because of his gang affiliation. But the evidence said otherwise. Witnesses, including former members of the Hells Angels, confirmed his involvement in the crimes and recounted his orders to eliminate anyone who threatened the gang. In the end, the court handed down a harsh sentence to Sanders, 25 years in prison. The prosecutors noted that this sentence was the result of a plea deal, which allowed them to avoid a longer trial. Sanders claimed that he was forced into a plea deal, and he maintained his innocence until the very end, stating that he was framed, but his words didn't change public opinion. People following the trial saw him as a criminal who used fear and violence to hold onto power, but his words did not change public opinion. People following the trial saw him as a criminal who used fear and violence to hold onto power. Even members of his gang started to turn away from him, realizing that his actions had led to the downfall of their crew. Even members of his gang started to turn away from him, realizing that his actions had led to the downfall of their crew. The sentence handed down to Sanders was an important signal for other gang members. The Hells Angels' power began to wane, and their leaders found themselves in the crosshairs of the law. However, as history has shown, this isn't the end of their activities. Ahead lie new cases and new charges. The next case takes us to Sonoma, where the leader of the local chapter got involved in an even more shocking crime. Sonoma, blood and power. In the heart of California, in Sonoma County, yet another leader of the Hells Angels showed that there are practically no limits to the brutality of this gang. Jonathan Nelson, also known as John, was one of the most powerful members of the gang. But it was his actions that led to one of the most high-profile trials against the Hells Angels in history. Nelson and 2 of his accomplices, Brian Wynn and Russell Taylor, nicknamed Rusty, found themselves at the center of an investigation that involved not just murders, but also extortion, assaults, and witness intimidation. The main episode that became key in the case against Nelson was the murder of former gang member Joel Silva. Silva became a problem for the Hells Angels, as his behavior and conflicts with other members undermined their internal discipline. Nelson, who was leading the local chapter of the gang at the time, decided that Silva had to die. The plan was simple: lure him to the Fresno Club, where Wayne coldly shot him in the head. After that, the body was burned to cover up the evidence. But the murder of Silva was just the tip of the iceberg. The investigation revealed that Nelson and his associates used intimidation and violence to maintain power and eliminate threats. Witnesses claimed the gang members not only threatened the lives of those who might go against them, but also intimidated their families. This paints a chilling picture of a criminal network where fear and violence become the main tools of control. Federal and local law enforcement spent years gathering evidence against Nelson and his gang. The operation to catch the criminals turned into a coordination effort between multiple agencies, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the California Highway Patrol, and Santa Rosa Police. During raids across the country related to the Hells Angels case, numerous gang members were arrested, including Nelson and his associates. But one of the most shocking parts of this investigation was just how deeply the Hells Angels were involved in other crimes. The trial against Nelson showed their involvement in Silva's murder. A gang member cooperated for leniency. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence linking them to Silva's murder, as well as other crimes, including extortion, assault, and witness intimidation. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence was the confession of one of the gang members, who agreed to cooperate with authorities in exchange for a lighter sentence. His testimony shed light on the inner workings of the gang and its brutal methods. Fall of the leader. The verdict in the case was expected, but no less resonant. All three defendants were found guilty on all counts, including conspiracy to commit murder and extortion. Jonathan Nelson, Brian Wynn, and Russell Taylor received life sentences without the possibility of parole. This decision marked a significant moment in the fight against the Hells Angels, but it also highlighted just how deeply their criminal enterprise was rooted. The reaction of the accused was expected. No remorse, no words of regret. For them, it was part of the game, the rules of which they had long ago accepted. But for the victims' families, it was a small victory. Their lives would never be the same, but at least they knew that the guilty wouldn't walk free. The story of Nelson and his accomplices serves as yet another reminder that, despite all their power and influence, the law can catch up with even the most ruthless criminals. However, the Hells Angels aren't just about individual leaders. It's a whole system that keeps on existing and operating. If you're into videos like this, make sure to subscribe. And if you need a job, if you can write scripts, have skills in editing or voiceover, then you have a chance to join our team. Message us on our Telegram bot. The link is in the description. See you next time.